Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and for returning to the old world. Today we're talking about decision making in wargaming and why making decisions is actually a bad idea. Now what do I mean by this? Because surely decision making is a huge part of wargaming. We need to decide what faction we're taking. We need to decide what troops are going to make up our armies. In a lot of systems, we then also have to decide where our characters are going to be, which units are we embedding them in. And that's before we even get to where do I deploy, how do I move to achieving my objectives, who do I shoot, what order do I shoot in, etc, etc. There's so many decisions to make. So why am I saying we shouldn't be making decisions? Well, obviously I'm not saying we shouldn't be making decisions at all. But I think making decisions is also a recipe for things going quite wrong. Draw a parallel to sport. And a couple of sports in which I've got a reasonable amount of experience in, rugby and historical fencing. A key part of success is making your opponent make a decision. If you're in a 2-in-1 attacking situation in rugby, what you want is the defender to make a decision, to commit to something, so that you can make that choice be the wrong one. In fencing, the brain, the functional thinking part of the brain, is slow compared to the more primitive parts of the brain that just react. If you force your opponent to think and make a choice, it slows them down, and you can exploit this. Now, obviously in wargaming, things aren't happening so instantaneously. People have time to stop, to ponder, to think. So it's not about forcing them to use the wrong part of their brain to act, slowing them down to give you an advantage. But it is about giving them choice. Personally, I think where this comes down to fundamentally is the more decisions we have to take, the more things we actively have to do and deviate from our natural instinctive approach, the more likely we are to mess something up. And I don't mean moving something 5 inches instead of 4 inches or vice versa, but we make the wrong choice on either a tactical or strategic level, and we leave ourselves open to exploitation. Now, we might make 5, 6, 7, 10 decisions perfectly, but the more times we're asked to make a choice, do I shoot at this unit or this unit? Do I move in this way or this way? Do I screen that unit or that unit? Do I push with the objectives? Do I hold back off the objectives? How do I time my charges, etc.? The more of those decisions we have to take, the more likely we are to get something wrong. A really experienced player for Warhammer 40,000 was having a conversation which I was part of quite recently, and he expressed an opinion that at the highest level of the game, certainly in 9th edition of 40k, and it's moving in this direction now for 10th edition, the best players knew if a game was won or lost when deployment was finished. They knew how the game was going to pan out, so it allowed them being calm, collected when it came to making decisions, because they kind of knew what the outcome was going to be anyway. They knew how the game was going to play out. And it's kind of all of this has got me thinking. And it takes me back actually to when I had a little bit of success, not great success. I did reasonably okay at a couple of events at the first edition of X-Wing. And the list I was taking had one ship which effectively flew itself, one ship which was there to be a nuisance, so I just kind of pushed it around, and one ship where I had to think about what I was doing with it. I had to be fairly precise to get the most out of that vessel. But it meant, really, I was only making decisions about a third of my list. The rest of it just didn't matter. It flew itself, or it did a kind of pre-planned thing, and I shoved it around, but it didn't really matter. And I remember my first major event, my first store event, as the day wound on, and I think it was like round 7, round 8, something like that. So everyone's getting pretty tired, coming up against a really elite list, some really, really good models in it with great rules. But by this point, the opponent is quite tired. He's got a list which is quite challenging to use because you've got to think about every movement for all of your pieces. And by this point of the day, he's making a lot of mistakes. Fatigue's creeping in, he's not making the best choices. And actually I get a comfortable win against a list which, in normal circumstances, I'm pretty sure that opponent operating at his normal capacity probably would have beaten me. But he was tired, he'd had to make a lot of decisions during the day, he had to make a lot of decisions during our game. Eventually he gets them wrong, and I was able to capitalise. So where does this leave us? Well, making decisions leaves us vulnerable to mistakes. And I think good players will be minimising the number of decisions they are actively having to take. But they will also be forcing decisions on their opponent. So if you, for example, as a player, can get good board coverage in a game of something like Warhammer 40,000, it's forcing your opponents to then think about how to wrestle back that control in order to do what they want to do. You've forced a whole extra layer of decisions. It's not just deciding how they want to do their thing, but how can they get into a position where they can make the decisions about how to do their thing. Decisions on top of decisions on top of decisions, creating an environment where more and more things can go wrong and leave opportunities. So perhaps for me, this is a way to actually get better at wargames. I need to start thinking less of it in terms of a hobby and we push things around, beer and pretzels, all that sort of good stuff. But think about more of it in terms of sport. What do I need to do to gain the advantage? And quite simply, I think to an extent, it's forced my opponent to think. And the more I make them think, the better it will be for me. That's my theory, and it's definitely something I think I'm going to take forward and try out. Hopefully it means I won't be losing quite so many games on the table, but who knows? It'll be interesting to know what's your take on decision making in wargaming, whether it's a good or bad thing, and whether we should be case of mitigating the number of decisions you have to take. Do let me know in the comments below. All that remains for me to say is thank you very much for stopping by. I hope you've enjoyed my musings on this particular topic. If you've not already and would like to see more about my work, do look at the back catalogue, consider subscribing. All I may say is, once again, thank you very much for listening. I am Return to the Old World. Have a great day.